stuck in Nashville, and you know, they make so much money, and they do so well in Nashville. You can't get them out of there. You know.
Do you have any thoughts about the rising interest in country music?
I think it's fantastic. You see, country music was always a part of the influence on my...
These Elvis photos were hidden for decades until now. There's a photograph of Elvis Presley that you were never meant to see, not because it's scandalous, not because it shows something illegal or shameful, but because it shows something far more dangerous to the carefully constructed legend of the king. It shows the truth. The image was taken in early 1976, less than 18 months before Elvis would be found dead on his bathroom floor. In the photo, he's sitting alone, not on stage, not surrounded by screaming fans or flashing cameras. He's in a dim room somewhere in Memphis, shoulders slumped forward, eyes fixed on something just out of frame. His face carries a weight that no jumpsuit or stadium spotlight could ever hide. He looks like a man who has been running from something for so long that he's forgotten what it feels like to stop. This photo was never released. It never appeared in any magazine, any documentary, any tribute book. Within 48 hours of being developed, someone from Elvis's inner circle tracked down the photographer, and the image vanished, purchased outright, buried, erased from the public record as if it never existed. For almost 50 years, that's where the story ended. Just another rumor in a sea of Elvis mysteries. Another whispered legend among collectors and obsessives who spent decades hunting for the photos they knew existed but could never find. Then, 3 months ago, everything changed. An anonymous estate sale in a small Tennessee town. A box of old photographs sold for almost nothing. And inside that box, tucked between faded family snapshots and forgotten vacation prints, was the image that was never supposed to survive. When it surfaced online, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Some fans refused to believe it was real. Others broke down in tears, because this wasn't the Elvis they had been shown for half a century. This was someone else entirely. Someone human. Someone struggling, someone who looked decades older than 42. But here's what makes this story more than just one sad photograph. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a single image that slipped through the cracks. This was part of a system, a machine built specifically to control what the world saw and didn't see when it came to Elvis Presley. For years, Elvis's team operated with a simple but ruthless policy. Any photograph that didn't serve the image got bought, buried, or destroyed. Photographers who got too close found themselves approached by polite men with large checkbooks. Negatives were purchased at premium prices. Prints were confiscated. And in some cases, if the rumors are true, images were burned entirely, reduced to ash so that no one could ever know what they contained. This wasn't paranoia. This was strategy. Elvis Presley wasn't just a man. He was a product, a brand, a financial engine that generated millions of dollars every single year. And the people who controlled that engine understood something fundamental about fame. The image matters more than the reality. Let the public see Elvis sweating on stage, pouring his heart into a ballad, and they'll love him forever. Let them see Elvis alone in a dark room, staring at nothing, looking like he's already halfway gone, and the spell breaks, the fantasy collapses, the money stops. So they built walls around him. Not just physical walls, though Graceland had plenty of those. They built walls of silence, of suppression, of carefully curated imagery, designed to keep the legend intact, no matter what was happening behind the scenes. And for the most part, it worked. The Elvis the world remembers is young, electric, untouchable. He's the man in the leather jacket on the '68 comeback special. He's the voice that made teenage girls collapse in the aisles. He's the king, frozen in time, forever powerful, forever alive. But that photo from 1976 tells a different story. It tells the story of what happens when the cameras stop rolling and the crowd goes home. It tells the story of a man who gave everything to his audience and had almost nothing left for himself. And it raises a question that has haunted Elvis researchers for decades. If this photograph was hidden, what else was? Because this wasn't the first image they tried to bury. It wasn't the last. And some of the most disturbing photographs connected to Elvis Presley weren't taken by strangers with telephoto lenses or tabloid reporters looking for a scandal. They were taken by people he trusted, people who walked beside him through Graceland's gates, people who saw everything. And when you discover what those cameras captured and what happened to those images after Elvis died, you'll understand why this story was never supposed to be told. Elvis Presley was surrounded by cameras his entire adult life. Paparazzi outside the gates, professional photographers at every concert, fans sneaking shots from the crowd. But the cameras that captured the most revealing images weren't held by strangers. They were held by the people closest to him. The Memphis Mafia, the inner circle, the men and women who ate at his table, traveled on his planes, and watched him when the rest of the world couldn't see. These weren't professional photographers. They were friends, employees, confidants. And like anyone in the orbit of someone famous, they took pictures. Casual snapshots at birthday parties, candid moments by the pool, late nights in the den when Elvis was relaxed, laughing, being something other than the king. For years, these images stayed private. They were personal memories, not commodities. But the moment Elvis died, everything changed. Suddenly, those casual snapshots became valuable, incredibly valuable. Tabloids offered thousands of dollars for a single unseen image. Book publishers came calling. Documentary filmmakers started making lists of who might have what. And the people who had spent years inside Graceland faced an impossible choice: stay loyal to a dead man and keep his private moments private, or cash in on the access they once took for granted. Some chose money. Within weeks of Elvis's death, photographs started appearing in magazines and newspapers around the world. Images that showed him tired, overweight, struggling. Pictures that would have been destroyed instantly if he had still been alive to object. The people who sold them justified it in different ways. He would have understood. The world deserves to see the real Elvis. I need to provide for my family. But others in the inner circle saw it differently. They saw betrayal. A quiet war began over who controlled the visual legacy of Elvis Presley. On one side were those who believed the public had a right to everything. On the other were those who believed some things should stay sacred. And caught in the middle were hundreds, maybe thousands of photographs that had never been seen by anyone outside the Graceland walls. One former employee, whose name has been kept private for decades, reportedly possessed a collection of over 200 personal photographs. They weren't scandalous. They weren't exploitative. They were simply real. Elvis eating breakfast. Elvis playing with his daughter. Elvis sitting alone in the jungle room, staring at nothing, lost in thought. Collectors offered enormous sums for these images. Tabloids promised six-figure payouts. Even legitimate historians and archivists reached out, hoping to preserve them for posterity. The answer was always no, not for sale, not for publication, not for anyone. When this person died years later, their will contained specific instructions. The photographs were to be destroyed, every single one. It was their final act of loyalty to a man who had given them a job, a purpose, a front-row seat to history. And according to the family, those instructions were followed. But here's where the story gets complicated. Rumors persist that not all of those photographs made it to the fire. That somewhere, possibly still in Memphis, possibly scattered across estate sales and private collections, some of those images survived, waiting to surface, waiting to show us an Elvis we've never seen. And maybe that's exactly what he was afraid of. Because Elvis wasn't naive about cameras. He understood their power better than almost anyone. There are stories of him asking friends to delete shots they had taken, moments where he physically confiscated film, unwilling to let certain images exist, even flashes of anger when he felt someone had captured something too personal, too unguarded, too real. This wasn't vanity. This was survival. Elvis knew that the camera didn't just capture moments, it defined them. It froze them forever. And a single photograph, taken at the wrong time, could undo years of carefully constructed image. But the most revealing photos weren't taken at Graceland. They weren't taken at concerts or parties or private gatherings. They were taken in the one place Elvis believed he was truly safe. And when these images finally surfaced, even his most devoted fans struggled to accept what they were seeing. In the final years of Elvis Presley's life, a strange silence surrounded his health. Everyone close to him knew something was wrong. The weight gain was visible to anyone with eyes. The canceled shows told their own story. But the specifics, the medical details, the true extent of what was happening inside his body, that remained hidden behind closed doors and confidential arrangements. What most people don't realize is that documentation existed, not just medical charts and prescription records, but photographs, clinical images taken during examinations, candid shots from hospital visits, pictures captured by staff members and visitors who witnessed moments of profound vulnerability. These images were never meant for public consumption. They were taken for medical purposes, or personal records, or reasons that have never been fully explained, but they existed. And after Elvis died, they became the most aggressively suppressed photographs in the entire Presley archive. The few researchers who have caught glimpses of these images describe them in hushed tones. They show a man who looked nothing like the Elvis on stage. A man whose body had betrayed him completely. A man who, in his final months, appeared decades older than his actual age. The jumpsuit hid more than anyone realized. The carefully controlled concert lighting performed miracles that no camera flash could replicate. And the photographs taken in private told a story that contradicted everything the public believed about the King's final chapter. So why were these images buried so deeply? The obvious answer is dignity. Elvis Presley was one of the most photographed human beings in history. His image generated millions of dollars annually and continues to do so decades after his death. Releasing photographs that showed him at his most broken would have damaged not just his legacy, but an entire economic empire built on the memory of a vibrant, powerful, untouchable star. But there's another layer to the suppression, a darker one. Some of these photographs didn't just show Elvis suffering, they showed who was around him while he suffered. They documented the people who enabled his decline, who wrote the prescriptions, who looked the other way when they should have intervened. Releasing these images wouldn't just have embarrassed Elvis, it would have implicated others. And those others had every reason to ensure these photographs never saw daylight. Then there are the photographs from August 16, 1977. The day Elvis was found unresponsive on his bathroom floor. The day the music died for millions of fans around the world. What most people don't know is that images exist from the immediate aftermath. Not just crime scene documentation, but photographs taken by various individuals present in those chaotic first hours. Some were official, others were not. And their existence raises uncomfortable questions that have never been fully answered. Who authorized photographs to be taken at a death scene? Who thought in that moment of tragedy to pick up a camera? And more importantly, where did those images go? Over the years, some have leaked. Grainy, disturbing pictures that occasionally surface in tabloids or dark corners of the internet. Each time they appear, the estate moves quickly to suppress them. Legal threats are issued. Websites are pressured to remove the content. And publicly, representatives maintain the same position they've held for decades. These images should never have existed. Their distribution is a violation of the family's privacy and Elvis's memory. But here's where the conversation becomes complicated. Because not everyone agrees that suppression is the right approach. Some historians argue that these photographs, however painful, are part of the historical record. They document the death of one of the most significant cultural figures of the 20th century. Hiding them doesn't change what happened. It only obscures the truth. Others, particularly devoted fans, take the opposite position. They argue that some boundaries should never be crossed. That Elvis the man deserves the same dignity in death that he struggled to maintain in life. That releasing these images serves no purpose except to satisfy morbid curiosity and generate clicks for the people who publish them. There's no clean answer, no clear moral high ground, just a collection of suppressed images that sit in limbo, too painful to release, too significant to destroy, caught between the demands of history and the desire to protect whatever remains of a deeply complicated legacy. But these aren't the only hidden photographs that challenge the official narrative. There's one more category of suppressed images that almost nobody discusses. Not because they're too graphic or too sad, but because they reveal something that doesn't fit the story we've been told. And when these pictures finally came to light, they didn't just complicate Elvis's legacy. They threatened everything his family wanted the world to believe. When you step back and look at all of these suppressed images together, a pattern emerges that's impossible to ignore. The photograph from 1976 showing Elvis exhausted and alone. The private snapshots held by inner circle members who refused to sell. The medical documentation that vanished into locked archives. The images from August 16th that surface and disappear like ghosts. Individually, each one tells a small story. Together they reveal something much larger. The Elvis Presley we were allowed to see was a construction, a carefully edited version of a man who existed in full color but was only ever shown to us in approved shades. Young Elvis, powerful Elvis. The leather jacket and the hip shake and the voice that changed everything. That version was real, of course, but it was incomplete. The Elvis who aged, who struggled, who looked in the mirror and saw someone he didn't recognize, that Elvis was systematically erased from the visual record. And the question nobody wants to ask is simple. Who benefited from this erasure? The estate certainly did. A tragic but dignified death is easier to monetize than a slow, visible collapse. The licensing deals, the merchandise, the tribute concerts, the Graceland tours, all of it depends on maintaining a certain image. An image of greatness, an image of power, an image that doesn't include an overweight man struggling to get through a concert or a patient hooked up to medical equipment in a private hospital room. The family benefited too, not in a cynical way, but in a deeply human one. Protecting children and grandchildren from seeing their father and grandfather reduced to tabloid fodder. Shielding them from images that would have followed them through every school hallway, every job interview, every public appearance for the rest of their lives. There's nothing sinister about wanting to protect the people you love from that kind of exposure. And honestly, the culture benefited as well. We wanted Elvis to be immortal. We needed him to stay frozen in time. Forever young, forever dangerous, forever alive in the way that only icons can be. The suppressed photographs threatened that illusion. They proved he was mortal. They showed the cost of being Elvis Presley. And most of us, if we're being honest, didn't want to see that cost itemized in brutal photographic detail. But here's the part of this story that often gets lost in the debates about privacy and exploitation and historical truth. Not everyone who hid these photographs did it for money, or reputation, or legal protection. Some of them did it out of love. Think about the people who walked beside Elvis in his final years. The ones who saw everything. The ones who could have sold their images for enough money to change their lives and chose not to. They weren't protecting a brand. They weren't thinking about licensing deals or estate valuations. They were protecting a person they had watched give everything to the public until there was almost nothing left. Maybe they looked at those photographs and saw something the rest of us never could. Not a celebrity, not a product, just a tired man who deserved better than to have his worst moments frozen forever and passed around for strangers to judge. So where does that leave us? Decades later, with these images still scattered across archives and private collections, slowly surfacing one by one. As a culture, we have to decide what we actually want. Do we demand the complete truth, even when it hurts? Do we chase every hidden photograph until nothing remains private? Or do we accept that some things were hidden for a reason, and that honoring Elvis might mean letting certain images stay buried? There's no easy answer, but maybe the question itself reveals something important about our relationship with the people we turn into icons. We take so much from them. Their talent, their time, their privacy, their peace, and when they're gone, we keep taking, demanding more, consuming everything we can find, never quite satisfied. Maybe the greatest gift we can give Elvis now isn't another documentary or another tell-all book or another leaked photograph. Maybe it's simply letting him rest, remembering him the way he wanted to be remembered, and accepting that some doors were closed for a reason. If this story stayed with you, I want to hear your thoughts. Should these hidden photographs remain buried? Or does the truth belong to the fans who kept his legacy alive? Share your answer below. And if you want more untold Elvis stories, subscribe and stay close. The vault isn't empty yet.
While I was there, well, these men, kind of guessed, you might say. We'd get together and horse around a little bit and sing. And
shocking Elvis performance caught on camera for the first time. June 19th, 1977, Omaha, Nebraska. The Civic Auditorium is packed with 12,000 fans who have no idea they're about to witness something that will be hidden from the world for nearly 5 decades. They came to see Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, deliver another electrifying performance. What they got instead was something far more disturbing, far more human, and far more heartbreaking than any concert they could have imagined. The lights dimmed at exactly 8:30 that evening. The orchestra hit the opening notes of Also Sprach Zarathustra, that iconic buildup that signaled Elvis was about to take the stage. Thousands of camera flashes exploded across the arena like lightning. Women screamed. Men whistled. The energy was electric, pulsing through every seat in that auditorium. And then Elvis appeared. But something was wrong. The man who stepped into that spotlight was not the Elvis these fans had seen on album covers or in movies. He was heavier, yes, but that wasn't what made people freeze in their seats. It was his eyes. Witnesses who were there that night would later describe them as hollow, distant, like he was looking through the crowd rather than at them. His famous jumpsuit, white with elaborate gold embroidery, seemed to hang differently on his frame. He gripped the microphone stand not with his usual confidence, but like a man steadying himself against a storm only he could feel. The band kicked into the first number, and Elvis began to sing. But within minutes, those closest to the stage noticed something unprecedented. His voice cracked, not once, but repeatedly. Elvis Presley, the man with one of the most powerful voices in music history, was struggling to hold a note. The backup singers exchanged nervous glances. The band members kept playing, but their eyes kept drifting to the man at center stage, silently asking the same question: what is happening? Here's what makes this night different from every other Elvis performance ever recorded. This entire concert was filmed. Multiple cameras captured every angle, every moment, every crack in the facade of the king. This was supposed to be premium content, footage that would be sold and celebrated for generations. Instead, within 48 hours of this performance, every single tape vanished. The film canisters were collected, locked away, and according to multiple sources within Elvis's organization, orders came from the highest levels to ensure this footage never saw the light of day. Someone very powerful decided that what happened on that stage in Omaha needed to be erased from history. And for almost 50 years, they succeeded. But why? What could possibly be so damaging, so revealing, that Elvis's own team would bury professional concert footage? After all, this was a man who had been filmed hundreds of times. His performances were legendary, studied, celebrated. What made this night so different that it needed to disappear? The answer lies in what Elvis did approximately 40 minutes into that concert. Something so unexpected, so raw, and so completely out of character that the audience didn't know whether to applaud or cry. He stopped performing, not because of a technical issue, not because of a medical emergency that anyone could see. He simply stopped, stood at the edge of that stage, and began to speak. What he said in those next several minutes has been recounted by audience members, bootleg audio collectors, and even a few crew members who broke their silence decades later. And every single account describes the same thing. Elvis Presley, the most guarded celebrity of his generation, the man whose image was controlled down to the last detail, began telling the truth about his life, about his pain, about what was really happening behind the curtain of fame. The audience sat in stunned silence. Some people openly wept. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure if they were witnessing a breakdown or a breakthrough. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every word, every trembling hand gesture, every moment of vulnerability from a man the world thought they knew. Backstage, panic erupted. Handlers whispered frantically into walkie-talkies. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's notorious manager, was reportedly screaming at anyone within earshot. This was not the show. This was not the product. This was a man unraveling in front of 12,000 witnesses and multiple broadcast-quality cameras. What you're about to learn changes the Elvis story forever, because the king wasn't performing that night. He was breaking. And everything that happened in that arena, everything that was said and sung and revealed, explains why this footage was buried so deep that most historians didn't even know it existed. But to understand what happened on that stage, you need to know what was happening behind the curtain. And trust me, it's darker than you think. To understand why Elvis shattered on that Omaha stage, you need to rewind the clock about 6 months. Because what was happening inside Graceland and inside Elvis's inner circle during the first half of 1977 was nothing short of a slow-motion disaster. Everyone around him saw the warning signs. Nobody did a thing to stop it. Let's start with the man pulling the strings. Colonel Tom Parker had controlled Elvis's career for over 2 decades by this point, and controlled is not an exaggeration. Parker decided which movies Elvis made, which songs he recorded, which interviews he gave, and most importantly, which tours he would perform. By 1977, Parker had Elvis locked into a grueling schedule that would have broken a healthy man in his prime. Elvis was neither healthy nor in his prime. He was 42 years old, battling multiple chronic health conditions and consuming a pharmacy's worth of prescription medications every single day. And Parker's response to all of this was to book more shows. The financial pressure was suffocating. What most fans didn't know at the time was that Parker had gambling debts that reached into the millions. The Colonel needed Elvis on stage generating revenue, regardless of what it was doing to his health, his voice, or his mind. Every concert was another payment against Parker's losses. Elvis wasn't performing anymore. He was being harvested. Inside Graceland, the situation was equally dire. The Memphis Mafia, that infamous group of friends and employees who surrounded Elvis, had transformed from companions into enablers. They saw Elvis deteriorating daily. They watched him struggle to stay awake during conversations. They noticed his weight fluctuating wildly, his mood swinging from euphoric to despondent within hours. And what did they do? They kept the pills coming. They kept the doctors on call. They kept telling Elvis exactly what he wanted to hear because their paychecks depended on keeping the king happy. Priscilla had left years earlier, but she remained connected through their daughter Lisa Marie. In interviews decades later, Priscilla would admit that she knew something terrible was coming. She had seen Elvis during visits with Lisa Marie and barely recognized the man she had once married. The spark was gone. The humor had faded. What remained was a shell going through the motions of being Elvis Presley while the real man inside was drowning. The weeks leading up to that Omaha concert were particularly brutal. Elvis had been performing almost non-stop, dragging himself from city to city while his body screamed for rest. His voice was giving out regularly during shows. He had collapsed backstage at least twice, incidents that were quickly hushed up and attributed to dehydration or exhaustion. The truth was far more serious, but acknowledging that truth would have meant canceling shows, and canceling shows meant Parker didn't get paid. Then came the specific pressure point that made June 19th different. Elvis did not want to perform that night. Multiple sources confirmed that he fought against doing the Omaha show. He complained of chest pains. He said his voice wasn't ready. He begged for just a few days off to recover. The answer from Parker's camp was absolute. The show would go on. The contracts were signed. The tickets were sold. Elvis Presley would take that stage whether he wanted to or not. What happened in his dressing room before the concert has been described by two different witnesses who were present. Elvis sat in front of his mirror, barely moving, staring at his own reflection like he was looking at a stranger. His hands trembled as someone helped him into his jumpsuit. When asked if he was ready, Elvis reportedly said something that chilled everyone in that room. He said he was going to give them a show they would never forget. The way he said it made it clear he wasn't talking about entertainment. He walked onto that stage knowing exactly what he was going to do, and it wasn't what anyone expected. The cameras were rolling. The lights hit him. And then, Elvis did something no one had ever seen before. The first 30 minutes of that Omaha concert followed the standard Elvis formula. He opened with C.C. Rider, moved through a few up-tempo numbers, and delivered the hits that fans expected. But anyone paying close attention could sense something building beneath the surface. His movements were slower than usual. His banter with the audience felt forced, almost mechanical. The legendary Elvis charisma was flickering like a bulb about to burn out. Then came the moment that changed everything. Elvis was supposed to transition into Hound Dog, one of his signature crowd pleasers. The band hit the opening notes. The audience erupted in anticipation. And Elvis just stood there. He didn't move. He didn't sing. He simply raised his hand, and the music stumbled to a confused halt. 12,000 people fell silent, unsure if this was part of the show or something else entirely. What happened next has been pieced together from audience recordings, crew testimonies, and the fragments of official footage that eventually surfaced decades later. Elvis walked to the very edge of the stage, closer to the crowd than his security team preferred. He looked out at those thousands of faces, took a breath that seemed to carry the weight of his entire life, and began to speak. He talked about being tired, not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but a bone-deep exhaustion that had been building for years. He talked about feeling trapped inside a life that everyone else controlled. He mentioned people he trusted who had betrayed that trust, though he never named names. His voice cracked as he described waking up some mornings and not recognizing the man in the mirror. The audience sat frozen, unsure whether they were witnessing a confession or a breakdown. Then, Elvis did something unprecedented. He asked the band to play Unchained Melody, a song that wasn't even on the set list. His pianist began the gentle opening chords, and Elvis returned to the microphone. What followed was not a performance, it was an exorcism. His voice, which had been struggling throughout the tour, somehow found a power and emotion that defied explanation. Every note carried decades of pain, loneliness, and longing. Tears streamed down his face as he sang, and he made no effort to hide them. This was not Elvis the entertainer. This was Elvis the man, stripped of all pretense, bleeding his soul into a song while cameras captured every devastating second. The audience responded in ways no one expected. Some people wept openly, moved by the raw vulnerability they were witnessing. Others looked away, uncomfortable with seeing their idol so exposed. A few actually left their seats, later admitting they felt like intruders on something deeply private. The energy in that auditorium shifted from entertainment to something sacred and sorrowful. Backstage, chaos erupted. Crew members recall frantic whispers and panicked phone calls. Colonel Parker was reportedly furious, demanding to know why no one was stopping this. But what could they do? Drag Elvis off stage in front of 12,000 witnesses? The cameras kept rolling because stopping them would have created an even bigger scene. So the footage accumulated, capturing every raw moment of the King's unraveling. When the song ended, Elvis stood motionless for what witnesses describe as an eternity. The applause was hesitant at first, then thunderous, as if the audience understood they had just witnessed something historic. Elvis whispered a barely audible thank you, finished the concert with a few more songs performed almost on autopilot, and walked off stage without his usual farewell theatrics. Within hours, the machinery of image control kicked into gear. Tapes were collected. Crew members were reminded of their confidentiality agreements. The official story became that the Omaha concert was unremarkable, just another stop on the tour. For 50 years, that lie held firm. But footage has a way of surviving, and someone, somewhere, decided the world deserved to see the real Elvis, not the legend, but the man. Here's what makes this footage even more devastating. What it reveals about his final weeks will haunt you. Here's the detail that transforms this footage from remarkable to absolutely haunting. That Omaha performance took place on June 19, 1977. Elvis Presley died on August 16th of that same year. 58 days. That's all the time he had left when he stood on that stage and poured his broken soul into Unchained Melody. 58 days between that raw confession and the moment his heart finally gave out on the bathroom floor of Graceland. When you watch this footage, knowing that timeline, everything changes. Those tears streaming down his face weren't just emotion, they were premonition. That exhaustion in his eyes wasn't temporary fatigue. It was a man whose body was shutting down and whose spirit knew it. Elvis wasn't just performing that night, he was saying goodbye. And nobody in that audience, nobody in his crew, nobody in his inner circle understood what they were really witnessing. The people who should have protected him failed spectacularly. Colonel Tom Parker continued booking shows right up until the end, squeezing every last dollar from a dying man. The doctors surrounding Elvis kept writing prescriptions, enabling an addiction that was clearly killing him. The Memphis Mafia maintained their code of silence, prioritizing their proximity to fame over their friend's survival. Everyone saw the warning signs that night in Omaha. The footage made those signs undeniable. And still, nothing changed. This is precisely why the footage was buried. Not because it showed Elvis having a bad night, not because his voice cracked or his weight was unflattering. It was buried because it documented institutional failure. It captured proof that everyone around Elvis knew he was dying and chose to do nothing. That footage wasn't just embarrassing. It was evidence. It was a timestamp on collective negligence that contributed to the death of the most famous entertainer on the planet. The rediscovery of this footage reads like something from a thriller novel. For decades, it sat in a private collection, passed between estate sales and memorabilia dealers who either didn't understand its significance or were paid to keep quiet. Then, approximately 3 years ago, a researcher working on an Elvis documentary stumbled across references to the Omaha tapes in old production logs. The official record said they were destroyed. But the researcher kept digging. What emerged was a network of former crew members, aging collectors, and one anonymous source within the Presley estate who confirmed the footage still existed. Getting it released required legal battles, authentication processes, and negotiations with parties who had very good reasons to keep it hidden. The fact that you can now see this performance represents years of work by people committed to historical truth over manufactured legacy. The fan community has been divided since the footage surfaced. Some longtime Elvis devotees consider it sacred, a final gift from the king that reveals his authentic humanity beneath the rhinestone jumpsuits and karate moves. Others find it exploitative, arguing that Elvis deserved to have his worst moments remain private. Both perspectives miss the larger point. This footage matters because it shatters the comfortable mythology we built around Elvis Presley. For decades, the official narrative presented his decline as sudden and unexpected. The footage proves otherwise. It shows a prolonged, visible deterioration that everyone around him witnessed and ignored. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about how we treat the artists we claim to love. We consumed Elvis. We demanded he perform through illness, through exhaustion, through a pharmaceutical dependency that should have landed him in treatment rather than on stage. We bought the tickets and the albums and the merchandise while his handlers worked him to death. That Omaha footage doesn't just show Elvis breaking. It shows us the machinery of fame grinding a human being into dust while thousands applauded. The larger lesson extends far beyond Grayson. We've watched this pattern repeat with artist after artist in the decades since Elvis died. The names change, but the story remains identical. Handlers who prioritize profit over well-being. Enablers who mistake access for friendship. Fans who demand more content while ignoring obvious cries for help. The Elvis footage isn't ancient history. It's a mirror reflecting how we still treat celebrities today. Strip away the king, the icon, the legend, and what remains on that Omaha stage is simply a man in extraordinary pain asking to be seen, not worshipped, not exploited, just seen as a human being who was struggling and needed help. For those few minutes during Unchained Melody, Elvis dropped every mask he'd ever worn and showed the world exactly who he was and how he was suffering. We weren't listening then. 50 years later, we finally have the chance to hear him. Elvis gave the world everything he had: his voice, his image, his health, his sanity, and ultimately his life. And in this one performance, captured on footage that was never supposed to survive, he finally asked for something in return. He asked for understanding. He asked for compassion. He asked to be remembered as he truly was. The least we can do is honor that request. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling me which Elvis song speaks to your soul. Because next week, I'm uncovering another buried moment from music history that powerful people never wanted you to see. Help me keep these stories alive. The legends deserve the truth.
It was taken from a karate suit, just a regular karate type outfit. Are they coming to get me? Is that it?
The official story of Elvis Presley's death has been repeated so many times it's become gospel. Heart attack. Found on his bathroom floor. The king of rock and roll gone at 42. But here's what they never told you about August 16, 1977, and the horrifying 24 hours that led to the moment Ginger Alden's screams echoed through Graceland's hallways. Elvis woke up at 2 in the afternoon on August 15th, already drowning. Not in the swimming pool behind Graceland, but in a cocktail of medications that would make a pharmacist's head spin. His cousin Billy Smith, who spent that last day with him, recently broke his silence about something strange he noticed. Elvis kept touching his chest, rubbing it like he was trying to massage away some invisible pain. When Billy asked if he was okay, Elvis just stared at him with those heavy-lidded eyes and said something that still haunts Billy 46 years later. "I feel like I'm being pulled under, man, like something's got hold of me and won't let go." That night, Elvis did something that should have raised every red flag imaginable. At 2 in the morning, he demanded to see his dentist. Not tomorrow, not in a few hours, but right then. Dr. Lester Hoffman later revealed that Elvis showed up at his office sweating profusely, barely able to sit still in the chair. The king wasn't there for a toothache, he was there for Dilaudid, a painkiller so powerful it's usually reserved for terminal cancer patients. Hoffman gave it to him. Just another prescription in the avalanche of pills that had become Elvis's daily bread. By 4 a.m., Elvis was playing racquetball at Graceland with his cousin Billy and his girlfriend Ginger. But this wasn't the Elvis who could move like lightning on stage. This was a man weighing nearly 260 pounds, wheezing after every serve, his face flushed purple with exertion. Billy remembers Elvis suddenly stopping mid-game, sitting on the floor and saying he felt like his heart was going to explode. They helped him back to the mansion where Elvis did what he always did when his body rebelled. He reached for more pills. The bathroom where Elvis died wasn't just any bathroom. It was his sanctuary, his reading room, his escape from the world. Black marble, gold fixtures, a padded seat where he'd spend hours reading spiritual books while his body fought against the chemical warfare he was waging on it. Ginger Alden found him there at 2:30 p.m. on August 16th, but the paramedics who arrived have kept one detail secret until recently. Joe Esposito, Elvis's road manager, was already in that bathroom when they got there, and he was holding something. Papers, documents, something he stuffed into his jacket before anyone could see what they were. Paramedic Charlie Crosby, who's now in his 70s, finally revealed what he saw that day. Elvis hadn't just fallen off the toilet like the official story claims. His body was contorted in an unnatural position, his right hand stretched toward the bathroom door like he'd been trying to crawl toward it. There was vomit on his face, blood from where he'd bitten through his tongue, and his eyes. Crosby says he'll never forget those eyes. They were wide open, frozen in what looked like absolute terror. But here's the detail that changes everything. On the bathroom counter, Crosby saw at least 12 prescription bottles, all filled within the last week. Different doctors' names, but all for Elvis Presley. The paramedics were told not to mention the pills. They were told not to mention the position of the body. They were told to keep their mouths shut, and until now, they have. The tragedy is that Elvis tried to save himself in those final moments. The phone in his bathroom was knocked off its cradle, the cord stretched tight like he'd grabbed for it as he fell. Who was he trying to call? His doctor? His father? Or was he trying to dial 911, finally ready to admit he needed help beyond what his enablers were providing? We'll never know, because by the time Ginger found him, Elvis Aaron Presley had been dead for hours. His body already cold, his secrets already being swept away by the very people who claimed to love him most. The king didn't just die that day. He was murdered by neglect, greed, and the systematic betrayal of everyone who should have saved him. And the worst part? They all knew it was coming. The Memphis Mafia. That's what they called themselves, Elvis's band of brothers who lived in his shadow and fed off his light. But in the summer of 1977, these so-called friends had transformed into something far more sinister. They weren't protecting the king anymore. They were circling him like vultures, waiting for him to fall. Red and Sonny West had been with Elvis since the beginning, Red was there during the Sun Records days. Sonny joined when Elvis needed bodyguards who felt more like family. For 20 years, they ate at Elvis's table, lived in houses he bought, drove cars he gave them. Then, 2 weeks before Elvis died, they plunged a knife so deep into his back that those close to him say it's what finally broke him. Their tell-all book, Elvis, What Happened?, hit shelves on August 1, 1977. Elvis read every word, locked in his bedroom at Graceland, and according to his girlfriend Ginger, he cried for 3 days straight. The book exposed Elvis's drug use, his violent outbursts, his paranoia. But what destroyed Elvis wasn't the truth of it. It was that Red and Sonny had been taking notes the whole time, documenting his darkest moments while pretending to be his protectors. They'd already spent their advance money before Elvis even knew they were writing it. Billy Smith later revealed that Elvis kept asking, "How could they do this to me? I gave them everything." The answer was simple. Everything wasn't enough. While Red and Sonny were selling Elvis's secrets for publishing deals, Dr. George Nicopolis, the infamous Dr. Nick, was running the most devastating con of all. New pharmacy records uncovered in 2019 show the true scope of his prescription empire. In Elvis's final 8 months, Dr. Nick prescribed him over 10,000 pills. Dilaudid, Percodan, Demerol, Quaaludes, Valium, and dozens of other medications that should never be mixed. The pharmacist who filled these prescriptions recently admitted he called Dr. Nick multiple times, warning him that these combinations could be fatal. Dr. Nick's response? Just fill them. Elvis knows what he's doing. But Elvis didn't know what he was doing because his judgment was clouded by the very drugs Dr. Nick was pumping into him. The Memphis Mafia saw it happening. They watched Elvis stumble through Graceland at 4 in the morning, talking to people who weren't there. They saw him forget lyrics to songs he'd sung 1,000 times. They saw him collapse backstage in Baton Rouge, in Baltimore, in Louisville. And what did they do? They picked him up, shot him full of more drugs to get him on stage, and collected their paychecks. Joe Esposito, Elvis's road manager and supposed best friend, was perhaps the most calculating of them all. Financial records show that while Elvis was deteriorating, Esposito was secretly negotiating his own deals. A book deal here, a consulting fee there, all predicated on his access to the dying king. 3 days before Elvis died, Esposito was on the phone with a Hollywood producer discussing a tell-all documentary. The working title? The Real Elvis. He'd already been paid a $50,000 advance. The most heartbreaking evidence of this betrayal comes from a series of recordings Elvis made in his bedroom during his final weeks. Sony released fragments in 2015, but the full tapes reveal Elvis's devastating awareness of what was happening around him. In one recording, his voice slurred but achingly clear in its pain. Elvis says, "They think I don't know what they're doing. They think I'm too gone to see it. But I see everything, every prescription they're selling to the tabloids, every story they're banking for later. They're all just waiting for me to die so they can really cash in." He was right. Within hours of Elvis's death, members of the Memphis Mafia were on the phone with publishers, agents, and TV producers. The body wasn't even cold, and they were already dividing up the empire of exploitation they'd been building. Lamar Fike sold his story to the National Enquirer before Elvis's funeral. Marty Lacker was negotiating a book deal during the wake. These weren't friends mourning a loss. These were vultures who'd been patient long enough, finally free to feast. Colonel Tom Parker wasn't a colonel, wasn't named Tom, and wasn't even Parker. The man who controlled Elvis Presley's entire career was living the greatest lie in entertainment history, and that lie would ultimately destroy the king of rock and roll. The truth about Andreas Cornelis van Kuyk, an illegal immigrant from Holland who fled murder charges in his homeland, is more twisted than any Hollywood script could imagine. In 1929, a young Andreas van Kuyk disappeared from Breda, Netherlands, after a woman was found bludgeoned to death behind a grocery store where he worked. He surfaced in America with a dead man's identity, eventually becoming Tom Parker, a carnival barker who learned how to separate people from their money with a smile and a handshake. By the time he met Elvis in 1955, Parker had perfected his con. He didn't just want to manage Elvis, he wanted to own him. The contract Parker presented to a young, desperate Elvis and his overwhelmed parents was unlike anything in music history. 50% of everything. Not just concert revenue, but recording, merchandise, movies, even personal appearance fees. Entertainment lawyers who've reviewed the contracts say they've never seen anything so predatory. But that was just the beginning of Parker's stranglehold. Because Andreas Van Kuyk couldn't leave America without risking exposure of his true identity, he made sure Elvis couldn't either. When the world begged Elvis to tour internationally, when the Beatles invited him to England, when Japan offered millions for a single concert, Parker said no. He convinced Elvis that foreign audiences were dangerous, that the money wasn't worth it, that America was enough. The truth was, Parker couldn't get a passport without revealing he was an illegal immigrant who'd been living under a stolen identity for 30 years. So Elvis, the most famous man on earth, became a prisoner in his own country, performing endless shows in Vegas while his contemporaries conquered the world. Those Vegas shows weren't just limiting Elvis's career, they were killing him. Parker had accumulated gambling debts that would make your head spin. By 1976, he owed various casinos over $30 million. The mob bosses who ran Vegas didn't care about IOUs. They wanted their money, and Parker had only one asset valuable enough to cover his markers. Elvis became a human ATM machine, contracted to perform 2 shows a night, 7 days a week, for months at a time. His body breaking down, his voice cracking, his spirit dying with every performance, all to pay off the gambling debts of a con man who was supposed to be protecting him. The financial documents are staggering. While Elvis was generating over $4 million per Vegas engagement, he was taking home less than 20% after Parker's cut and expenses. Parker had even negotiated side deals with the casinos, taking kickbacks Elvis never knew about. The International Hotel was paying Parker $1 million a year just to keep Elvis on their stage. That money never appeared on any statement Elvis saw. But the cruelest betrayal was what Parker did to Elvis's dreams. After Elvis returned from the Army in 1960, directors like Hal Wallace wanted him for serious dramatic roles. There was talk of Elvis playing opposite Barbra Streisand, working with prestigious directors, becoming the actor he'd always wanted to be. Parker killed every opportunity. He demanded so much money up front and such a huge percentage that studios walked away. Then, he'd lock Elvis into another terrible beach movie for a fraction of the price because those producers would pay Parker under the table. The moment that finally broke Elvis's heart came in 1974. He discovered that Parker had been selling I Hate Elvis buttons at his concerts. The same man taking 50% of the I Love Elvis merchandise was profiting from both sides, turning his client's fame into a double-ended cash machine. When Elvis confronted him, Parker just laughed and said, "We're in the business of making money, boy. All money spends the same." By 1977, Parker had already prepared for Elvis's death. Documents discovered in Parker's estate show he'd negotiated posthumous merchandising deals, had death announcement press releases pre-written, and had even arranged for exclusive photo rights to Elvis's funeral. The parasite had evolved into something worse. He'd become an undertaker, measuring his meal ticket for a coffin while Elvis was still breathing. In the weeks before his death, Elvis Presley did something that nobody knew about until 2021 when a Graceland employee finally came forward. He was making recordings, not music, but documentation. Hidden in his bedroom with a small cassette recorder, Elvis was building a case against the people destroying him. These tapes, which the Presley estate has fought to keep sealed, contain the most damning evidence that Elvis knew exactly what was happening to him. Linda Thompson's cousin, who worked maintenance at Graceland, recently revealed he helped Elvis set up the recording equipment. Elvis was paranoid, but not in the way people thought. He wasn't imagining threats, he was documenting real ones. On one tape, dated July 23, 1977, just 3 weeks before his death, Elvis's voice, tired but determined, can be heard saying, "If something happens to me, people need to know the truth. I'm not crazy, I'm not out of control, I'm being systematically destroyed, and I have proof." That proof went beyond just recordings. Elvis had been meeting secretly with FBI contacts he'd cultivated during his famous visit with Nixon in 1970. Agent Gerald Coleman, now retired, finally admitted that Elvis had contacted the Bureau multiple times in his final months, claiming he was receiving death threats from people within his own organization. Elvis believed someone close to him wanted him dead, and he wasn't wrong to be suspicious. The financial forensics done after his death showed that several people in his inner circle stood to make millions from his demise. The safety deposit box Elvis kept at First Tennessee Bank in Memphis was his insurance policy. According to the bank manager who retired in 1995, Elvis visited that box just 4 days before he died, spending over an hour in the private viewing room. He was seen carrying a large manila envelope when he left. That box, which should have been sealed after Elvis's death, was mysteriously empty when authorities finally opened it. The bank's security footage from that week had been accidentally erased. Every single frame. What makes this disappearance even more chilling is what Elvis told his nurse, Marion Koch, the night before he died. She'd been brought in because Elvis trusted her more than Dr. Nick's regular staff. Elvis grabbed her arm and whispered, "If anything happens to me tomorrow, there's a key in my wallet. Tell my daddy about the key." Vernon Presley later searched frantically for this key, but Elvis's wallet had been cleaned out by the time his body reached the hospital. Someone in that Graceland bathroom had taken whatever Elvis wanted his father to find. 3 days before his death, Elvis made his final desperate move. He'd arranged a secret meeting with Jerry Weintraub, a powerful manager who handled Sinatra and was interested in taking over Elvis's career. They met at a private home in Memphis, away from Parker's spies. Elvis was ready to fire Parker, ready to break free, ready to save his own life. But Parker had eyes everywhere. Within hours of that meeting, Parker was on a plane to Memphis, showing up at Graceland unannounced. The argument that followed was so violent that staff members hid in their rooms. Elvis's last words to Parker, according to the cook who overheard them, were, "You've killed me, you bastard. You finally killed me." The Graceland staff who were there that final night have been telling consistent stories for decades, stories that paint a picture of a man who knew he was living his last hours. Elvis spent his final evening going from room to room, giving away jewelry, cars, even cash to everyone working that night. His cook, Mary Jenkins, said he hugged her and told her she'd been more of a mother to him than anyone since Gladys died. He gave his nurse his personal Bible and said, "You'll need this more than me." These weren't the actions of a man planning to wake up the next morning. The financial autopsy revealed the true crime. Elvis Aaron Presley, who had generated over $100 million during his career, died with less than $5 million to his name. His checking account had $1,055. The man who'd changed American culture forever couldn't have afforded to buy his own plane ticket out of Memphis. The money hadn't disappeared. It had been systematically drained by management fees, prescription costs, hush money, and loyalty payments to keep the circle of corruption intact. The most haunting parallel is that Elvis died exactly the way his mother Gladys did. Same prescription drugs flooding their systems, same doctors signing the papers, same people profiting from their deterioration. Elvis had watched his mother die from pills in 1958 and swore he'd never let it happen to him. 19 years later, he was gone the same way, betrayed by the same type of people who'd promised to protect him. The king didn't just die. He was executed by 1,000 small betrayals. Each prescription, each enabled binge, each stolen dollar another step toward that bathroom floor. Want more shocking revelations about music's biggest icons? Subscribe now and hit the notification bell.